Hello, you beautiful people out there. Welcome back to the Prison Pod. So glad to have you join me again. We're about midway through season 4, and again today we have another guest. I try to keep guests on here every week. There might be sometimes it'll only be me, but I really appreciate the guests that join us. We always take away something important from that. And today's guest is David Gatchell. And he is a voice in financial literacy and also in reentry support. And he is the author of the book, The Financial Empowerment Handbook. And I would like to welcome David.
Well, good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
And you're joining us from Texas, is that true?
That's right, here in Austin.
Okay, so there's a little bit of distance between us since I'm here in Maine, but I'm assuming financial literacy is just as important here as it is there. Although I
So,
think you need a little more money to live there than you do Maine.
yeah, it's been getting more expensive to live here lately, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you taking time out to join us today. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write the Financial Empowerment Handbook, and especially how you geared parts of it towards formerly incarcerated people.
Well, thanks for the intro. I wrote the book a couple years ago with the primary audience for people in my family. I have two nieces who are entering high school, and then my kids are a little bit younger than that. And the idea behind the book was to lay out all of what I feel is important for them to know about personal finance, so they can, choose their own path to prosperity in the future, right? So it started as a project for my kids and people in my family. But as I moved forward in the process of writing, and it was my second book that I wrote myself, I realized that there's a big demand out there. There's a big movement that I was not aware of in financial literacy. A lot of people are doing really great work these days to educate people. What I found was that there are a lot of holes in the system, however, and some schools offer their own programs for financial literacy, and those are great, right? There's some highly qualified teachers that know all about this stuff. They're in front of a class of students in high school, for 2 semesters, and that's awesome. If anybody has an opportunity like that, I would always suggest they take it. That's in the formal education. But so many young people don't have access to that. Even in the school system, there are so many schools that don't have anything like that. And some schools offer embedded programming where they teach a little bit of financial literacy in an economics class or a social studies class. That's okay, but it's not enough. It's insufficient, in my opinion. So I wrote the book. It follows state and national standards for financial literacy. So if someone does not have a structured program to take advantage of, if they read the book, they'll get all the information anyway at their own pace. And the book is built on stories and examples to make it a little more entertaining, a little more user friendly for a young audience, which I think is critical. Right? It's one thing to write a book; it's another thing to make it a book that people want to read. And so far, we've gotten a lot of great feedback on the book from young people, especially. So that's sort of the history of the book, why I wrote it. The intended audience is anybody that hasn't learned this stuff formally or feels they need to learn it now at their life, wherever they are in their life. It specifically relates to formerly incarcerated individuals or those that are currently incarcerated because it has a lot of the basic information that they also didn't learn before going in or when they come out, things that they need to start rebuilding their lives or building their lives from scratch. And a lot of that starts with credit scores. I've talked to a lot of people in the justice impacted space, and one of the big issues is credit scores, right? They come out after being in prison for a period of time, and they either have zero credit score or a negative. It's not a positive attribute on their record when they get out, and so that makes things even harder, right? They have a hard enough time. After serving time, they come out and then they're trying to rebuild, and they have a really bad credit score. They can't get financial leverage that a lot of us other people can, and so it's tough. So step one, I would always recommend someone coming out of prison would be to focus on a few steps to improve a credit score. But there are a number of other things just in terms of just general financial literacy, whether it's insurance or predatory loans or things like that, that an individual who is maybe uneducated on this type of topic might not know, and they might get into a worse position, like I said, with a predatory loan, for example. So the book tries
Could you
to introduce a reader to all these topics, so they can choose their own path to prosperity.
could you talk a little bit about predatory loans? Because I know a lot of college students get caught up in that free credit card, no interest for the first year. And I think that, there's a lot of people that need money, so they're trying to find any way to get that.
Yeah. That's a great point. I know when I started at college, there were, pop-up tents all over campus giving free pizza, free t-shirts, and free credit cards. And as a college student, that just sounds awesome, right? You get a shirt and some food, and you get a credit card. And then at the time, they were giving out $500 balances. So there was no education that went along with it. They weren't even talking about interest rates. You sign something, sure. Everyone always signs something. But no one ever emphasized, okay, yeah, if you use this and carry a balance, you're going to pay 25% interest on that amount. That was not emphasized. The emphasis was on go and use your card and take a free T-shirt, and the world is great. Credit cards are a huge problem, especially for young people, but not just young people, right? There are plenty of working folks that carry credit card debt. And really carrying any credit card debt, you're paying probably 20+%. So that's high. You're carrying a lot of debt. You're paying a lot of extra costs for what you purchased. That's technically not considered predatory. It's highly negative for someone to carry $1,000, $10,000, $50,000 in credit card debt, right? Because they're just paying all their disposable income is going towards paying off that debt, and they get nothing extra for it. And so that might be 20 to 25% interest. When I talk about predatory loans, I'm talking about things like payday loans, title loans. You see these places on the side of the highway. They're never really in places where you want to stop and go in, right? They're looking for people in difficult situations, and they typically charge a fixed fee per time period, but it's a very short time period. If you do the math, and you end up paying the equivalent of almost 400% a year. So if you go in and, payday hasn't come yet, you need to borrow $1,000 to pay your bills, you might only have to pay like $30 or $50 for that for a 2-week period. But if you calculate it and you have to pay that every 2-week period over a year, when I did an example, and an example I include in the book shows 390% interest paid over that time frame. So that's predatory, right? 390% compared to say 25% for a credit card. That's predatory. So those are the main ones I talk about where there's got to be a better way. The only people that go for title loans or payday loans are in a difficult situation, and I feel for them if they need $500 to pay for some medical support for their baby. I get it. That's a tough spot to be in. Try to get out of it as soon as you can. The recommendation, right? Try to, extract yourself from that predatory loan as soon as you can and find alternate means to cover that. Even credit card, right? I would exchange a payday loan for a credit card balance any day of the week. And then, of course, try to pay that off. And eventually, if someone does need additional funding, try to get a bank loan, something like that. That's going to be much more reasonable.
Now, I know when I was younger, I always said, well, when I have more money, I'll start saving. And I found as I got older, that was a very bad attitude to have. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of saving, even if it's the very minute amount that you can save?
Great point. I was speaking this past weekend to a group of college students here in Austin, and one astute young man mentioned that he's not yet ready to save. His focus was on just not. He didn't want to spend more than he made. He wanted to live in his means, and I said that is an amazing concept for a young person about 20 years old to recognize that so many of us, sometimes myself included, we lose sight of, right? You don't even need to get into complicated budgets and expense tracking and all these things. Just don't spend more than you make, right? That's just like simple step one to prosperity is, try to save something or don't overspend. When it comes to spending, and I was sharing this with the group that I was in front of last weekend, a lot of it comes down to behaviors, right? So one lady in the class, she said, "I'm saving about $1 a week," and I said, "Awesome, that is great. You keep that up." I recognize that $1 a week, she's going to have about $50 at the end of the year. That's not a lot, right? Let's be honest. But if she starts that habit when she's in her teens or 20s, she's saving $1 a week. That's better than nothing, no doubt about it. If she increases that with increased income, like when she graduates and gets a real job and has more significant income, and that $1 a week goes to $10, goes to $100 a week, now we're talking real money, real savings, and real long-term impact. So there are a lot of people that talk about, well, I'm going to save once I start making a certain amount of money. There's some threshold that they haven't hit yet. What I see typically happens is when they get to that threshold, they think, well, I'm not ready yet because I still need to upgrade my car, right? And so I'm going to take a new car loan. But when I pay that off, then I'm going to be able to start paying this. It's always, a few steps beyond where they are today when they'll be able to actually save something. And the same thing goes for, charitable contributions, right? It's not just saving for myself, but it's saving so I can help others. And the idea is that when you decide how you want to live your life and what you want to do with your money, start doing it, right? At a very small scale. Again, this young lady was saving $1 a week. Someone wants to contribute to charity, which I certainly support and advocate for, $1 a week, $1 a month, $1 a year, whatever it is, you're doing something. So once you have that habit, you're working that muscle of saving or contributing to charity. It's a lot easier to increase that. It's very difficult if you're in your 30s or 40s or pick an age. You're making some money, you've got a lot of expenses, maybe kids, house payments, repairs, all these things. To say, okay, I haven't saved so far, or I haven't given to charity so far in my life, but I'm going to change now. That's hard. It's a lot easier to kind of start that behavior from the beginning. So when does that start, right? I'm teaching my kids about giving now, and they're in elementary school. Certainly, the earlier one starts, the better, and especially once someone starts with their first full-time job is when I would certainly recommend setting aside some savings and setting aside some charitable contributions.
So let's see. I've covered so many already. For people that are in prison, as you know, the finances are very limited. Um, is there actually a way to save money while you are in prison?
Full transparency, I do not have that lived experience, right? I don't claim to understand what someone who's going through that or has been through that has to deal with. I can only expect it's the most challenging thing they faced in their life so far. And I respect people that go through that because it's a tough process, and they either come out better for it or worse for it, I expect. But those that come out and they really want to make a change, there's a big hill ahead of them in terms of getting reintegration into society. Certainly learning about finance, which is what we're talking about. When someone is on the inside, I don't have a good idea of how finances work, what opportunities they have to earn money, opportunities they have to spend money. And talking to different people across the country, I recognize that there are all different types of situations, right? Different institutions have different policies regarding work, regarding use of technology, regarding visitation, things like that. So I think that there's a lot of different cases in the system. What I would say was always the recommendation is always to focus on what I mentioned earlier, right? Don't spend more than someone has coming in. And so if there are ever opportunities like that, even on the inside, I would always recommend don't spend it if you don't have it. who knows how people pay off their debts in prison. It's not a predatory loan; it's something totally different. I don't have experience with that, but it might be even more challenging or at a higher cost if someone's on the inside.
Now, you mentioned that you wrote this book originally with like those last couple of years of high school. Is that around where the reading level of this is?
The book is written for a 16-year-old reader. We made the level of reading right there at 16, between 16 and 18 actually, so that it doesn't put anybody off. Right? It's not a college economics textbook. It's a practical guide written at a very practical level. We actually did a whole review process to make sure we're not using a lot of jargon that the everyday person may or may not know. We're not trying to sound intelligent in the book. It's very very practical, and we did go through it and remove anything that might sound like jargon. And if it was something that we needed to include in order to be comprehensive, we offered a full definition to introduce the term.
Really like the idea that I don't want to say it's simple, but it's very laid out and easy to follow. I took college economics and I failed it. So my first thought was when I was reading the book, and my husband also went through it, was when we were having a conversation about it, was why don't they use this in economics instead of what they use in, I mean, I know it's basic, but most people that are going into college haven't taken business courses. So if you're on the course of taking college courses, I think you're less apt to have like general business where you learn about finances and banking and legal things, insurance, all of that. I think is more for those that aren't geared towards going to college. So I like the idea of that. And so I would recommend it really to anyone who doesn't have financial knowledge, which like I'm almost embarrassed to admit that with a master's degree, my financial literacy is about at somebody who's 20 years old. I mean, I just never was interested in it. And I had a husband who took care of the budget and the bills, and but now, as I'm getting older, I'm realizing how important it is to know that stuff, especially when we get to the point of retirement. And, if you're going to sell a house or buy a house or whatever.
That's a great point, right? My book is not, like I mentioned earlier, an economics textbook. It's very different, in fact. And I know when I was in high school, I took, I think, a one semester economics class. It was macro, micro combined, just overall economics. And then I took another economics class when I was in college, and I didn't love it. It didn't seem very practical to me. When someone takes an economics class, they're going deep into the theory and whether it's macroeconomics or microeconomics, how do things work. To a lot of people, that's not really my life. You know what I mean? However, the personal financial literacy, as I see it, is a life skill. It's not economics, right? Could you embed personal finance in an economics class? 100%. That might be the best place to embed it if you have to embed it. If you can just have a separate class. I mean, I think back in the day there was home economics, right, to learn how to manage a household. I think there needs to be something similar for how to manage your own personal finances now. And I would argue, and I have done before, that a class on personal finance is potentially the most valuable class a young person can have, whether it's in high school or in college. You can pick any other subject, and I think I could argue how learning how to manage your personal finances from when you're 18 until you retire and then eventually die and leave an estate, how to manage that is more valuable than advanced biology or or calculus 2. You know what I mean? Like some of these things have a limited value. Once you get out of that course, whether it's high school or college. I'm an engineer. I studied engineering. I did half of a master's, so I didn't actually graduate with my master's. I don't use any of that stuff. Engineering students, they go through higher level calculus and more advanced math topics. I haven't used any of that stuff since I finished that class. Not even most of that stuff I didn't use again in a class that came after it. There's a lot of information that we learn that we never use, and the information in the book, the information that's available through other personal finance educational platforms, is stuff that you will use every day. And I do like to emphasize that it's not high level economics. It's very practical, how to understand what's on your paycheck, right? You're earning a certain wage, yet you get a certain amount in your paycheck, and it's not the same. It's drastically reduced. And I remember my first formal paycheck. I thought I don't know, back in the day, I was making like 4.25. My first job was at Subway, and I was making 4.25 making sandwiches. And I get my first paycheck, and it's not 4.25 times 10 hours or 20 hours. It's reduced. And so people need to understand that, right? That's on the, earning money side of things. And then how do you effectively spend money, right? How do you avoid scams? How do you not take on credit card debt? Just things like that. They're very practical. And one thing that I created recently, a lot of people are talking about financial literacy and how overall in our country and in the world, the level of financial literacy is relatively low, right? A lot of us say there's a problem. But there's no quantification of that. Well, what do we really mean? How many people know it? How many people don't? What's their level? Like, what components within financial literacy do they understand, and which ones do they not? So there was some gray area there. So we created what we call the Finance IQ test. It's at financeiqtest.com, and it's a 50-question test, and you have 30 minutes to take it. And it covers all the chapters, all the concepts in the book, which also mirror all the concepts in national standards and state standards. And so, again, nothing complex. You don't need a calculator. It's really testing someone's understanding of basic concepts, principles, like medical insurance, car insurance, pay stubs, saving for charity, saving for retirement, things like that. Basic things that people need to know. And if someone takes a test, the idea is that nothing intended to embarrass or make anyone feel bad that they didn't get 100% or they scored lower than they thought. But it's a tool, it's a diagnostic for where someone is today in their financial literacy to illustrate what they might need to focus on. And we have a free study guide as well, which covers everything. So if someone doesn't have enough time to read the book, they can at least take the study, read the study guide, and then take the test and see where they are. And some people out there, they know all about this stuff. I feel blessed because I learned most of financial literacy from my family growing up. And then since then, as a professional, I've had a number of opportunities and experiences having my own businesses, buying and selling homes, doing things like that where I get to use that type of information, practice it, refine it, get better at it. Like I said, buying a home, I've done that multiple times for one of my businesses, and so that's how I can introduce it in the book as sort of some tips and tricks on buying a first home. So the test, which like I said, I'm happy to give your listeners a code where they can take the test for free, just see where they stand, and then anything that comes up as a question that they missed, they'd be allowed to obviously go back and try to double down on that topic and learn what they didn't know before.
I think that's a really great resource because we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes we think we know something, and then when it's pointed out to us, well, this is really how it works, then we have a better understanding of that.
Yeah, and
So
sometimes you kind of want to know like a 360-degree view of your knowledge in our conversation now regarding financial literacy so that you can supplement any weak areas now instead of waiting until you retire and say, oh, whew, I wish I knew this 40 years ago. I would have changed my behavior. I'm not advocating that, for a new college grad at 22 that, populating their retirement fund is the number one thing they need to focus on. No, but it's something they need to consider, and they need to have a plan to start doing that. Earlier the better. But my point is, I know looking back, I would have loved to have all of this information in front of me when I was 18, right? I had a lot of it, and I'm grateful for that. I was blessed to grow up in a family that educated me on these topics. Um, but a lot of it I've also learned after leaving home and learning and failing on my own. And the book includes a lot of my own failures as a way to illustrate that you know there's no path in my experience. There's no path to prosperity that doesn't include a number of times when we fall down and then we have to get back up. The question is, do we get back up? Do we get out of our bad situation and stand back up and rebuild and move forward that way? And so that's kind of the approach in the book. Is on a kind of personal level, I talk about times when I had failures and how I got past them and continued to move forward in spite of some setbacks. But knowing this information earlier in one's life, I think can have a dramatic impact.
Now I have something totally different to ask you. One of the first things I noticed about the cover of the book is it reminded me of the zodiac signs. Was that anywhere planned or was it coincidental?
It must be coincidental. I'm not familiar with the layout of the zodiac signs. I know of them, but I don't know how they look. It's not connected with the zodiac.
I didn't think it was in any way, but it's really funny because in a zodiac circle, they have the 12 different things and little symbols. And I really like, because I have the book here and like some of the symbols on here is the money sign, your your cap from graduation, spending, credit, debit, and it goes around the circle. And the way that I'm not into astrology or anything, but the way that the zodiacs work supposedly is everything is connected. And so I really like the way the cover stands right out. That's what I was going to say
Good.
about it.
I can tell you my idea when I built the cover, and I came up with the concept, and then I had a designer put it together. But some years ago, I did an exercise called the Wheel of Life, and I don't know, maybe it's got 8 different pie pieces with concentric circles, sort of like a bullseye, and you go around each one, and you're rating each individual pie section as one piece of your life. How well is it going for you? And one piece was finance, one piece was personal relationship, one piece was health. And there are about 8 or 10 of those. And so you say, okay, I'm 100% on personal health. I'm doing really great. And then the next one is personal finance, and maybe I'm just 2 out of 10. And so then there's like a big rut in the wheel, right? So when you do the whole wheel, when you fill that out, it's not a nice smooth surface unless you're 100% or 80% on absolutely everything. There are going to be some bumps. And so I thought of that when I was putting together the cover, thinking that these are the pieces of financial literacy that everybody needs to have a good understanding of. If not, there are going to be some bumps in the road, right? If someone doesn't understand the income side or the spending side or the risk, protection side of things, they might be doing really well earning money. And a lot of people are in this situation. They make a lot of money. And then what do they do on the spending side? They still spend 104% or 110% of what they're bringing in. And so you have these high earners out there who are carrying a lot of credit card debt, right? You think that, okay, when someone is earning a high salary, they can easily pay for all their necessities and they can just save a bunch. In reality, that doesn't happen very often. They earn a lot and they spend a lot. Lifestyle creep, some people call it. And so, you get a promotion at work and you think, okay, well, I'm moving up to the next floor in the building. I have a new title. I need a new car, right? Got to have a new car, and then, well, I'm going to be entertaining clients, so I need to have a vacation home. It just creeps, right? And so people feel these pressures as they move up to keep spending, not in line with their increased income, but beyond their increased income. So anyway, that's what I say with you can be doing well in one section, but then failing in another. And in insurance, right? If someone's doing well everywhere else and they're not carrying the appropriate insurance, and they have a medical emergency. I mean, how many times have you heard of someone going bankrupt because they had a medical procedure and they didn't have insurance? And that wipes out all the savings, all the income. The vacation home is gone. You know what I mean? So that's why I think a 360-degree view of one's personal finances is critical.
You brought up a really important point about insurance because a lot of people say, well, I can't afford insurance. But if something major goes wrong, and this is any situation, even renter's insurance, people don't understand that if you are in a rental unit and it gets broken into, your landlord is covered for the damages done, but anything stolen is too bad. That's on you. So you need that. Same thing with a car insurance. You have car insurance and you get in an accident, then you owe $20,000 to somebody because you didn't have insurance. No one has any clue of how expensive medical is until that accident happens. When you think that something's going to be $700 and you find out, oh no, it was $7,000, you know. So those are things that. And another thing that you had brought up was habits. A lot of our financial, um, I don't want to say bad habits, but we have a lot of bad habits in our country, and the credit cards is one thing, payday loans another thing. So we're in debt before we ever get our next paycheck. And that's one thing that we really need to curb our wants. And unfortunately, we live in a country that we want and we want and we want it now. We don't want to have to wait. And that's not a real good habit to have. If there's something that we really want, it's worth saving for and waiting for. So,
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think wherever someone is, sort of on the continuum of working, earning, spending, all this stuff, if they never get ahead of it, if they never get ahead of their expenses and actually spend less than they make and are able to save something, they're stuck because they rely on that job 100%. And the day they lose their job for whatever reason, in the past month, tens of thousands of federal employees have been losing their jobs. Anytime the market goes up or down, certainly when it comes down, more people lose their jobs, their layoffs. That always is a surprise. No one's expecting to get laid off, right? It's usually a pretty quick burn from economic crisis to someone losing their job, and then right after that they lose their health insurance. They lose all these things, right? And if someone doesn't have an emergency fund, and I'm a strong advocate for everyone having 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up, just for that job layoff, for that car breakdown, whatever it is. If someone doesn't have a few $100s, a few $1,000s to cover an emergency expense, then they have to go to the credit card, or that's when they have to go to the payday loan. And then it just snowballs, right? And then you're carrying this debt on top of where you were before, where you weren't really able to save much anyway. And now you're kind of going negative, having to pay this debt. So I think having that emergency fund, and then once you have that populated to a good level where you can survive for a few months after you lose your income, then continue, again, habits, continue with that savings for things that come next in your life. Maybe you want to take time off and not work for a few months. Maybe you want to have a baby and take time off from work and not have an income. All valid reasons to stop working, right? But you got to have a plan for that. You got to have some savings to support yourself so you can do that. And so I always advocate for number one thing is setting up that emergency fund, and then after that continuing with one's savings so they can actually get to a higher level. We're not just about survival, right? I guess some of us are in difficult situations, and certainly when someone gets out of prison, that's a difficult position to be in. They might be in survival mode for a little while, right? Trying to find some source of income, trying to pay the bills that they need. And I'm not saying it's easy, but if they don't find a way to save a little bit every month, build up the nest egg, build up some some foundation, they're never going to have security. They're never going to have any kind of freedom. They're going to be forced to work in jobs that they don't like, for bosses that treat them badly, and without having that foundational layer of finance, personal finance, there's no path forward, right? They're just staying right where they are, and sadly, a lot of people do live life like that, right? They start working in their early 20s or teens even, and just work for 50 years, and they never enjoy what they're doing. They're always just breaking even every month. And without that savings mentality, that discipline, no one's ever going to kind of rise up above that and be able to invest in things and support their family more. You know what I mean? So I do think the savings piece is critical for upward mobility.
Well, we've certainly covered all kinds of stuff today. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to add before we wrap things up?
I think we did cover it all. I mean, obviously, I can talk at length on financial literacy topics. Anybody that's interested, I'd obviously recommend exploring resources out there for financial literacy. My book is one. Obviously, I'm biased. I think it's a great resource, but anything is better than nothing. And then check out the test at financeiqtest.com. Prison Pod will be the scholarship code to use for all free access. You can take the test, retake the test as many times as you want to kind of get a full picture on where you are in your own personal financial literacy. And then obviously, if there are weak parts to your game, you can learn. Right? And I think it's best to do that as soon as possible for everybody. Right? These things that you learn now, really they'll last with you a lifetime. So can have a big impact.
Some great points. Thank you so much. Um, I've really got a lot out of the book, and I've reevaluated the way I look at things myself. So I want to remind the listeners that the book we're talking about is the Financial Empowerment Handbook. And this is by David Gatchell, and it's Gatchell. I recommend anyone who's in high school, anyone who's inside, and anyone who does not have a lot of education on finances, pick this book up because it gives some very basic things to help you move ahead as far as your financial literacy. Again, David, thank you so much for joining us.
All right,
Um,
it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Great. And I'll let everyone know where you can find the book and find the IQ test on our YouTube site. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another edition of the Prison Pod.